The cold bit deeper the longer I stood there, seeping through wool and skin and bone, until even my breath felt like ice. The valley clearing had been scrubbed and sanctified for weeks, yet it still smelled like what it had always been, a ring of packed earth and old roots, dressed up tonight with torches and silver incense to impress a king. Above us, the moon burned the color of spilled wine, swollen and red, staining every stone and face in the lunar circle. Tonight was the Ascension. The elders called it a blessing older than Varenfall itself, the night when the moon confirmed the next luna of the north. To everyone gathered in the circle, alphas, warriors, pups hoisted onto shoulders, it was already decided who that luna would be. And it wasn't me. I waited behind the last row of cloaks in a plain gray dress that did nothing to keep out the cold or the stares. Gray was safe. Gray blurred you into the stone, the smoke, the shadows. If I could have turned myself into mist and drifted out of sight, I would have. Instead I stood there, hands clasped so tightly they ached, listening to my own pack hiss my names under their breath. Wolfless. Omega. Veil shame. They didn't bother to lower their voices much. Why would they? I was the mistake everyone had agreed to keep as a warning. The proof that even a pure bloodline like ours could crack. As long as Selene ascended tonight, the fracture I embodied could be smoothed over, sealed with vows and royal titles and a crown of moonstone. Selene stood at the altar like she'd been carved for it. Moonlight clung to her silver gown, turning each embroidered thread into a trail of light. Her fair hair was braided and pinned with tiny quartz stars, her chin high, her shoulders loose with the kind of confidence you were born into and never had to question. When she lifted her hands toward the blood-red moon, the crowd leaned forward as one, as if pulled. She looked like a Luna already. My sister. My salvation. My replacement. The plan was simple. Selene would be chosen, the Alpha King would claim his perfect match, and our family name would rise with hers into the glittering, untouchable north. Varenfall would become the favored valley of the crown. My existence, Eris Vale, the wolfless failure, would fade into a cautionary footnote. That was the unspoken bargain. Selene would shine, and I would disappear. So when the High Elder lifted his arms and called for silence, I fixed my gaze on the dirt. If I didn't look, I couldn't ruin anything. My heart tripped anyway, faster and faster, because something in the air had shifted, a faint buzzing under my skin, a pressure behind my ribs, like a storm too far off to hear but close enough for the wolf I didn't have to feel. The magic didn't feel smooth tonight. It felt jagged. Wrong. A hush slammed over the circle so completely the fire seemed to shrink. It wasn't reverence. It was fear. He had arrived. The black wolf stepped from the tree line first, huge and silent, as if the forest itself had exhaled him. He moved without sound over frozen ground, shoulders rolling under midnight fur, eyes burning the same glacial blue every story whispered about. Embers flashed briefly under his paws where snow met earth, then vanished. The torches lining the circle guttered low, bending toward him as he passed. The Alpha King of the North did not announce himself. The world rearranged around him. Gast shivered through the crowd when he padded to the edge of the altar and stopped. For a heartbeat he only stood there, massive and dark against the red moon. Then his form blurred, bones snapping and reforming, fur folding into armor. When the shift ended, a man straightened where the wolf had stood. Kael Rodar. I had seen sketches of him in old chronicles, heard the stories told in a dozen frightened variations, how he'd united bloodthirsty northern packs, how he'd never lost a battle, how he wore his enemies' marks on his skin instead of trophies on his walls. None of those tales had prepared me for the reality. He was taller than any man in the clearing, built like the stone towers of Blightstone I'd grown up seeing in nightmares. Leather and dark steel wrapped his frame, straps crossing his chest, pauldrons studded with moon metal. Pale, jagged scars dragged across his face, 3 claw-like lines scoring from brow to cheek, another vanishing into the high collar at his throat. For the briefest moment, I thought I saw something else there, faint lines of dull, cracked light under his skin, pulsing and then gone when he adjusted the leather. His eyes were the worst. Not brown, not amber like any wolf I knew, but cold, burning blue, lit from within like ice under lightning. When he stepped forward, heat fled the circle. Wolves who had faced war without flinching lowered their gazes. He stopped before the High Elder, and the Elder bowed so deeply his forehead brushed the stone. "Alpha King of the North," the old man intoned, voice shaking, "we welcome you to Varenfall. Tonight the moon will reveal your Luna." Kale's gaze drifted over the assembled wolves, moving from face to face with slow, predatory patience. Every girl in the front rank straightened, tipping chins, letting scents bloom, hope and fear and desperation tangled in the air. When he reached Celine, his eyes lingered. Of course they did. She shone under that stare, the red moon framing her like a halo. My parents stood behind her, brimming with restrained triumph. I could almost feel their thoughts, finally, finally, finally. My heart tried to lift in my chest for her. For them. For all of us. Then his gaze slid on. Past Celine. Past the ranked daughters of Betas and warriors. Past the altar and the neat lines of stone where the elders stood. It moved through the crowd like the edge of a blade, and when it reached the back row, it found me. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me and did not see a mistake. He saw something else. The air thickened, like the moment before thunder cracks. A strange, sharp ache bloomed in the hollow where my wolf should have been, a phantom pain that stole my breath. Kale's eyes narrowed, that impossible blue pinning me in place. Behind him, the black wolf I'd just watched disappear into his skin seemed to rise again as a shadow, looming at his back, ears pricked, gaze locked on me. I didn't move. I couldn't. The entire circle fell away, the whispers, the torches, even my sister glittering on her altar, until there was only that stare, that pull, and the feeling that whatever line my life had been tracing until this moment had just reached its edge. I didn't know yet about the curse gnawing at his flesh. I didn't know that the emptiness inside me wasn't a defect but a theft, or that the same spell had already tied our fates into a knot neither of us was meant to survive. All I knew was that the Alpha King of the North was looking at the wrong sister. And that was the moment everything that had been planned for me began to unravel. Subscribe now so you're here for every turn this story takes. The High Elder's voice broke through the ringing in my ears. On this night of the blood moon, he intoned, we gather to witness the Alpha King's choosing. May the goddess guide his. Kale moved. The words withered on the old man's tongue as the Alpha King stepped away from the altar. Each stride thudded through the earth, steady and unhurried, like he already knew where he was going and didn't care who stood in the way. The line of ranked she-wolves swayed toward him. I felt the shift ripple through the crowd, breaths held, hearts stuttering, scents blooming sharp and sweet. Celine was at the very front, silver skirts spilling over the stone like poured moonlight, chin tilted in perfect submission. He should have gone straight to her. That was the way this night was supposed to go. Walk to the altar, take her hand, let the High Elder speak the blessings everyone had already memorized. Instead, Kale Rodar descended the steps and paced slowly along the semicircle of waiting women. He passed the Beta's daughters first, pausing only long enough to inhale their scents. One girl swayed, eyes fluttering, when his gaze brushed her. Another bared the length of her throat a fraction too eagerly, his eyes turned to ice and slid on. Celine's fingers tightened around the edge of the altar. I knew that tell, the tiny strain at the corner of her mouth. She was calculating, recalibrating, a lifetime of certainty cracking around the edges. He'll come back, I thought wildly. He has to. This is just formality. A show. My chest wouldn't loosen. As Kale moved, the strange pressure under my ribs built, a pulse that had no business existing where my wolf should have been. My fingers dug into the fabric of my dress. He turned toward the altar at last. My sister straightened. The High Elder let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. Kale didn't stop. He walked past Celine. Gasps tore through the circle. The world seemed to tilt. I saw my parents' faces in a blur, mother's features going slack, father's mouth opening in a silent oath. Celine stood frozen, hand still outstretched toward a man who no longer saw her. Kale Rodar kept walking. Past the altar. Past the elders. Past the rows of ranked daughters who had spent years training for this one moment. Each step carried him deeper into the sea of common cloaks, through warriors and omegas and startled pups hastily tugged aside. He came to a halt in front of me. For a heartbeat, nobody reacted. It was too absurd, too impossible, for anyone's brain to catch up. I could smell him now, winter wind and iron and something darker beneath, like burned pine resin. Heat rolled off the armor beneath his furs, yet the air around him felt colder than the snow. Up close, the scars on his face were harsher, the 3 slashing lines that bracketed his eye like claw marks carved by lightning. Tiny fractures glimmered faintly along them, faint as veins of dead light beneath ice. When he breathed, the skin there tightened, as if something beneath it pulled and resisted. His eyes locked on mine. Eris, I whispered before I could stop myself, because it felt like he was searching for my name, as if he needed the sound of it hanging between us. The great black wolf that was his other half paced just at the edge of my vision, more shadow than substance, teeth glinting when he pulled in my scent. The phantom ache behind my ribs sharpened, becoming a white-hot line that nearly buckled my knees. Kale lifted one hand. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to flinch. I didn't. I held still as his gloved fingers brushed a strand of hair away from my face, as if he needed to see the whole of me clearly before he decided. A murmur rose, wild and disbelieving, from the circle. Alpha, that is the wrong. Someone, an elder, maybe, started forward. The black wolf's growl ripped through the air like tearing stone. The man froze in place. Kale's hand cupped my chin. She smells wolfless, another voice said, horrified. My king, she is mine, Kale said. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The words rumbled out of his chest and rolled over the clearing, heavy and absolute, carrying with them the weight of a decree that could not be challenged. The world broke open. For one wild heartbeat, everything was sound. Celine's strangled gasp. Mother's soft cry. The furious snarl of some alpha from another valley. The crackle of the torches, suddenly too loud as the fires leapt higher, feeding on the chaos. Then all the noise sucked inward, leaving a ringing silence. Kale dropped his hand from my face and turned to the High Elder. "Speak the oath," he ordered. The old man stared at him, mouth opening and closing. "Alpha King, there must be some mistake. The Elder Vale daughter is not my mate." Kale's gaze flicked to Celine for the briefest instant, unreadable. "The moon does not err. The bond is here." He looked back at me. "With her." His grip closed around my wrist. Heat seared through the thin wool of my sleeve, burning up my arm and into the hollow beneath my ribs, where the phantom ache twisted into something else, shock, terror, and a flicker of something wildly, traitorously like recognition. "No," the word tore out of Celine. For the first time in my life, my sister sounded small. "No, that's not possible. She's wolfless. She can't be." She broke off, eyes flashing to me, then to our parents, searching for someone to set the world back the way it had been. Mother's hand covered her mouth. Father's jaw clenched so hard I heard his teeth grind. "Alpha." One of the visiting alphas stepped forward, bowing stiffly. "Eris Vale is an omega. Barely fit to." Kale's gaze slid to him, deadly calm. "Do you challenge my claim?" The man swallowed. I felt his fear like a sour tang in the air. "I only mean to advise." "Then advise your tongue to hold." Kale's fingers tightened on my wrist. "The moon has spoken. This valley should be grateful it has given your bloodline a place at my side." Grateful. I felt sick. The High Elder finally found his voice. It shook, but he forced the words out, clinging to ritual like a drowning man to a branch. "The Alpha King has chosen," he croaked. "Let the bond be witnessed." I stood in a dream while he recited the ancient phrases. My mind replayed Celine at the altar, years of training, every confident smile and gentle correction she'd offered me when we were alone. This was supposed to be her night. Her crown. Her fate. My fate had always been the shadows. When the elder asked for my acceptance, my lips moved before my brain caught up. "I accept," I heard myself say. As if there were any other answer. Kale's thumb brushed the inside of my wrist, right over my racing pulse, sealing the moment. The air thrummed, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. Something brushed the edge of my consciousness, a presence like cold wind snarling against iron bars. Then it was over. The pack erupted. Voices crashed into each other, outrage and fear and frantic calculation. Some wolves stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. Others wouldn't look at me at all. I caught the word which more than once, the hiss of curse following close behind. Celine pushed through the press of bodies, eyes bright with unshed tears, lips trembling. She stopped a few feet away, staring at Kale as if sheer will could force him to look at her instead. "This isn't right," she whispered. "I'm the one who was promised. I trained for this, Her gaze snapped to mine. For a heartbeat, the hurt in her eyes speared straight through me. Then something harder slid over it. Not hatred, Celine had never known how to truly hate, but a sharp, cold resentment. I tried to speak. To tell her I hadn't asked for this. That I would give it back if I could. No sound came out. Kale stepped slightly in front of me, a casual movement that nevertheless blocked me from her view. "The carriage will be brought," he said to no one and everyone. "We leave before moonset." He didn't raise his voice, but the command moved through the clearing like a physical shove. Northern warriors who had been standing at the edges ghosted into motion, dark cloaks swirling, hands never far from their weapons. My father stepped forward at last, as if dragged by some final thread of pride. Alpha King. He forced himself to meet Kale's eyes. Heiresses, unprepared for such a station. Perhaps, if given time, the bond might reveal. The bond has revealed itself. Kale's tone cooled another degree. Would you accuse your goddess of error, Vale? Father's mouth snapped shut. His eyes darted to me, and for the first time I saw something like unease there. Not worry for me. Worry about what I might mean now. Father, I whispered. The word tasted like ash. He didn't answer. Mother's gaze skittered away from mine, focused somewhere near my shoulder, as if looking at me directly might shatter what fragile composure she had left. Kale's arm slid around my waist. The contact jolted me. It wasn't gentle, but it wasn't cruel either. It felt inevitable, like the closing of a steel trap. Heiress Vale, he announced to the stunned circle, is my chosen Luna. From this night forward, she is under my protection. Any hand raised against her will answer to the north. A metallic taste flooded my mouth. Protection. As if I were some precious thing he'd decided to lock away. The warriors formed up around us as we moved toward the edge of the glade. Varenfall parted before them, my own pack peeling back like water pushed aside by a prow. I caught a final glimpse of Celine on the altar, silver gown stark against the blood-red moonlight. Her eyes burned into mine, a mixture of grief and something that made my stomach twist. Then the tree swallowed her. The carriage waiting at the edge of the forest was nothing like the traveling wagons I knew. Black lacquer, iron-bound, wheels thick enough to grind stone. The emblem of the north, a stylized wolf's head wreathed in storm, gleamed on the door. A warrior opened it, bowing low to Kale. His gaze flicked to me, curiosity and contempt warring in his expression. She rides with me, the king said. The warrior's brows lifted briefly, but he stepped back without argument. I climbed into the carriage on numb legs. Inside, it was surprisingly warm. Furs lined the benches, and a small brazier burned blue-white in a bracket near the floor. The air smelled faintly of herbs and cold iron. Kale slid in after me. The space shrank around his bulk. When the door shut, the outside noise dimmed to a muffled roar. For a few breaths we simply sat there, facing each other. He seemed even larger in the close confines, shadows pooling in the hollows of his scars. You look as if you expect to be devoured, he said at last. My throat bobbed. You arrived with a giant wolf and announced to my entire pack that I belong to you. Forgive me if I'm unsettled. One corner of his mouth twitched, almost, like the ghost of a smile. It never reached his eyes. Belong, he repeated quietly, as if tasting the word. I claimed you, Heiress Vale. That is not the same thing. It feels like a very thin difference from where I'm sitting. His gaze sharpened. I immediately regretted the bite in my tone, but I couldn't seem to stop it. Everything in me was coiled too tight, the years of being nothing, the shock of suddenly being the center of the storm. You are my Luna, he said. Not my prisoner. The carriage lurched into motion. I grabbed the strap above the window to steady myself. Then why didn't you ask what I wanted? My voice cracked on the last word. Why didn't you let my sister? Because the moon did not give me your sister, he cut in, harsh. It gave me you. Something flickered across his face, a momentary tightening around his eyes, the barest hitch of his breath. His hand went to his collar, fingers pressing briefly at the place where scar met skin. For an instant, I saw it again, those faint, dead light fractures pulsing beneath the surface. Pain. He was in pain. He masked it quickly, dropping his hand, but not before I caught the shadow of what it cost him. Questions crowded my tongue. I swallowed them. Whatever was wrong with him, whatever curse or wound he carried, it wasn't my business. Not yet. We rode through the night. Sometimes the carriage slowed and I heard the heavy thud of paws alongside the wheels, felt the vibration of that massive wolf running beside us like a living storm cloud. Other times there was only the creak of wood, the jingle of harness, and the muted murmur of warriors outside. Cale spoke little. When he did, it was to give short orders through the window slit, or to correct my assumptions with a few blunt words that left no room for argument. "Where are we going?" I asked once, when the trees had thinned and the air had turned sharper, carrying a scent like distant glaciers. "Blightstone Hold," he said. "My seat. My nightmares." I stared at him. "So that's just my life now?" "Yes." No apology. No explanation. Just that one flat syllable. I pressed my hands between my knees to keep them from shaking. Outside, the world changed. The dense pines of Varenfall gave way to sparser, taller trees. Snow thickened, swirling in pale sheets past the windows. The air that seeped through the cracks was so cold it burned. Hours bled into each other. At some point exhaustion dragged me under in fitful snatches of sleep, full of red moons and blue eyes and a sensation of falling. When the carriage finally shuddered to a halt for more than a brief rest, I jolted awake. "We've arrived," Cale said. My heart tried to hammer its way out of my chest. He opened the door. The cold hit first, a brutal slap that stole my breath. Then the sight of it, the fortress that had haunted the stories of my childhood. Blightstone Hold rose directly from the mountain, hewn from the same black rock. Towering walls jagged with ice teeth encircled a wide courtyard. Torches burned in iron brackets, their flames whipped sideways by the wind. Snow eddied across the open space in restless waves. Wolves filled the yard, men and women in thick furs and dark armor, their scents harsh and strange, their gazes cutting. Conversations faltered as the king stepped down, then ceased altogether when he turned to help me. No one offered me a hand. No one bowed. If respect for their king kept them from openly snarling, it didn't soften the contempt in their eyes as they took in the plain gray dress, the southern features, the absence of a wolf pressing at my skin. "She is the Luna," someone muttered, too softly for human ears. The wind carried it to me anyway. The goddess has a cruel sense of humor. Cale's aura flared, heavy and oppressive. The courtyard stilled. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't need to. The message in that sudden silence was clear: mock his choice at your own peril. "Inside," he said to me, voice quieter now, stripped of ceremony. I followed him across the courtyard, snow crunching under my thin shoes, the eyes of the north biting at my back. Massive doors of iron-banded wood swung inward as we approached, revealing a great hall lined with stone pillars and blazing hearths. Shields and weapons hung on the walls, their metal glinting in firelight. Heat washed over me, tinged with smoke and roasted meat and the musk of too many bodies packed into one space. The noise here was different from Varenfall, a low, constant rumble of conversation, laughter that never lost its edge. Cale didn't slow. He led me through the hall, up a wide staircase, along a corridor of carved rock lit by sparse torches. The stones radiated an odd kind of chill, as if the castle itself watched and waited. We stopped before a heavy oak door bound in black iron. "This will be your chamber," he said. "You will have everything you require." The door swung open on a room larger than the cottage my family had lived in. A massive bed dominated the center, piled high with pelts. A fireplace crackled on one wall, casting a golden glow over woven rugs and a carved wardrobe. A narrow window overlooked a sheer drop of cliff and the endless sweep of snow beyond. It was beautiful. It was a cage. I stepped inside on legs that didn't feel like mine. The room smelled faintly of cedar and cold stone. No other scent. No one had lived here before, not truly. Cale remained in the doorway, a solid, unmoving shape. "You are safe here," he said. The words were simple. They should have been comforting. Instead, they landed like a weight. "From what?" I asked. His eyes met mine, that impossible blue, softer now, but no less intense. "From everyone who thinks the moon made a mistake." My breath caught. He stepped back. The hinges creaked as the door began to close. "Wait," I blurted. "Cale." He paused. I hadn't meant to say his name. It felt strange on my tongue, too intimate. But I couldn't call him Alpha or my king when my voice was already fraying. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered. "Here. As your Luna." His gaze lingered on me for a long moment, as if he were weighing how much truth I could bear. "Stay alive," he said at last. "We will figure out the rest." The door shut with a soft, final thud. A bolt slid home on the other side. The sound echoed through the empty room, through my chest, through every plan that had ever been made for me. I stared at the wood, at the iron that kept me in and everyone else out, and understood with blistering clarity. I might be Luna of the North now. But I was also its prisoner. I might be Luna of the North now. But I was also its prisoner. Days proved it. Food arrived on a regular rhythm I began to resent. A knock, no voice, then the muted clink of a tray being set on the floor. When I opened the door, the hallway was always empty except for the woman who'd brought it, a tall, sharp-featured she-wolf with iron-gray hair braided tight against her skull. "The Alpha has ordered you fed," she said on the first morning, her voice flat as stone. "I am Varia. You will call if you require anything." I asked if anything included a key. Her expression didn't so much as twitch. "Anything reasonable, Luna." Then she turned and walked away before I could decide whether Luna on her tongue was respect or insult. The door remained bolted every time she left. So I paced. I stared out the narrow window until the endless white stopped looking like snow and started feeling like teeth. I counted the stones between floor and ceiling, traced the carved lines on the bedposts, memorized the pattern of cracks in the hearth. And always, underneath everything, I felt it. The sense of him. It lived in the walls, in the vibrations of boots striking stone far below, in the sudden hush that fell over the courtyard when he crossed it. I could tell when Cale was in the keep and when he had gone out simply by the way the air sat in my lungs, heavy and expectant when he was near, thin and echoing when he left. Sometimes I caught myself listening for his footsteps outside my door. Wanting them. Other times, the faintest scrape of boot on stone had me bracing, heart slamming, wishing he would stay away. I hated both needs equally. The emptiness where my wolf should have been felt thicker here. In Varenfall I could pretend she was just quiet. Here, surrounded by stone that hummed faintly with old power, the hollow inside me gaped wider, like the castle itself was peering in and finding nothing. On the fourth morning, Daria didn't bring a tray. She brought a dress. She strode into the room without knocking, a bundle of deep green folded over one arm. The door shut behind her with a decisive thud. "Up," she said. "The Alpha commands your presence in the great hall." My grip tightened on the blanket around my shoulders. "Why?" Her dark eyes slid over me, assessing, unimpressed. "Because you are his Luna. The court will see you sit beside him." My stomach dropped. Facing the north in this room, with a locked door between us, was one thing. Standing in front of all of them, with nowhere to hide. Daria shook out the dress before I could finish the thought. Heavy wool and velvet, high-necked, long-sleeved, the color of forest shadows. Not lavish, but undeniably fine. "Change," she said. "I will braid your hair." There was no point arguing. My hand shook as I pulled the dress on. The fabric held a faint scent of smoke and some unfamiliar herb. Daria's fingers were brisk and impersonal as she worked my hair into a crown braid, pinning it tight. "Do they all hate me?" I asked before I could swallow the question. She paused only a second. "They fear what they do not understand," she said. "And the North does not like surprises." That's not an answer. "No," she agreed, and tied off the last strand. The great hall was worse with bodies in it. The night I'd arrived, it had been mostly empty, a cavern of firelight and stone. Now it was full. Warriors lined the lower tables, cloaks thrown back, armor clinking. Advisors and pack leaders occupied the raised dais. The air was thick with the smells of meat, ale, and wolf, so many unfamiliar scents that my head spun. Conversations died as Varia led me in. Every gaze swung toward me at once. The weight of it was physical, a blow that shoved the breath from my lungs. I heard the murmur start up almost immediately, low and vicious, like a nest of wasps stirred with a stick. "Small, isn't she? Southern blood. What did he expect? She doesn't even carry a wolf, look at her aura. Empty." A laugh, half snarl. "Fitting, for a barren king." Heat crawled up my neck. The word snagged in my ears. Barren. I forced my chin up. If I dropped my eyes now, I'd never lift them again. At the far end of the hall, on the highest part of the dais, two carved chairs waited, one broad and imposing, edged in iron, the other slightly smaller, draped in pale furs. The Luna's seat. My seat. Daria bowed and stepped aside. "Go," she murmured. "Stand behind the chair until he arrives." I walked the length of the hall alone. No one bowed to me. No one smiled. A few wolves let their lips curl just enough for me to see the glint of teeth. By the time I reached the dais my legs felt hollow. I took my place behind the smaller chair, fingers gripping its carved back. The doors to the side of the hall opened. Kale entered with a few strides, not from the grand doors at the end but from a side passage, as if he had simply emerged from the stone. Conversation cut off mid-word. Every wolf, every single one, bowed their head. He wore no crown. He didn't need one. Authority hung on him like a second cloak. His gaze slid over the hall, taking in every detail in a heartbeat. When it reached me, something in his expression flickered, approval, maybe, or simply acknowledgement that I existed. Then he moved on. "Sit," he said as he reached the dais. The word was for the hall, but his hand gestured toward the Luna's chair without looking at me. My feet carried me forward on instinct. I lowered myself into the fur-draped seat. It felt wrong. Too high. Too visible. Kale took the throne beside me and the hall settled into a hum of movement. Trays were borne out, pitchers of dark ale passed down the tables. He spoke briefly with a grizzled man to his right, his beta, if I had to guess. I caught the name Darren in the murmur of voices. I tried to focus on my own plate, to ignore the stares. But words floated up, carried by careless tongues. Line ends with him, curse or no curse. They say no bond will hold, no womb quicken. A barren king with a barren Luna. The last came from somewhere close. A warrior at one of the nearer tables, his voice pitched just low enough to pretend he wasn't meant to be heard. My fingers tightened around the knife until my knuckles ached. Beside me, Kale's jaw clenched. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He cut his meat with slow precision, as if the blade were slicing through restraint instead. He didn't correct them. Didn't snarl, or snap, or demand an apology. Instead, under the table, his hand found my thigh. I jolted, a tiny, involuntary movement. His palm settled firmly just above my knee, fingers spreading, weight solid and warm through the wool of my dress. He didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the hall, voice calm as he asked Darren about border patrol rotations. But the pressure of his hand was a statement, I hear them. And I choose not to care. You are mine. Heat flooded my face, my chest, lower. Fear tangled with anger, with a flash of something molten and confusing I refused to name. I should have pulled away. I didn't. The hall saw his hand on me and drew its own conclusions. I felt them watching, measuring. When the meal finally ended, my head rang with the effort of holding myself together. Kale rose. The hall rose with him. He dismissed them with a few curt words and turned toward the side passage. Come, he said. No one followed us out. The corridor outside the hall was cooler, quieter. Our footsteps echoed off the stone as we climbed, the torches throwing flickering patterns over the walls. I lasted 3 flights before the words burst out. Is it true? Kale's stride didn't falter. You will need to be more specific. They call you Baron, I said, the word sharp and ugly. They say your line is cursed, that no bond holds and no heirs live. Is that why you chose me? Because a wolfless Luna suits a broken king? He stopped so abruptly I nearly collided with him. Then he turned. In the cramped space of the stairwell, he seemed even larger, the bulk of him blocking the narrow steps. I took an instinctive step back, shoulders hitting rough stone. His hands came up, bracing on either side of my head. I was trapped between his arms and the wall, heat from his body pressing against the cold at my back. Careful, he said softly. The torchlight caught the edges of his scars, turning them into jagged lines of shadow. His eyes burned, not with the distant ice I'd seen in the hall, but with something hotter and more dangerous. You know nothing of my curse, Eris Vale, he went on. And less of why I chose you. My breath scraped in and out. Then explain it. Would it ease you to hear that I did not want a mate at all? He asked, voice suddenly bleak. That every bond one have attempted ended in death? That for years the only thing I feared was the hope that one day the moon might give me another chance to kill someone I cared for? The hallway swayed. He exhaled harshly, as if he'd said too much. His hands dropped from the stone, fingers going to the high collar of his tunic instead. You want to see what they whisper about? He asked. Look. He unbuckled the leather strap and tugged the collar aside. I'd thought the scars were bad before. I'd been wrong. Darkness crawled up the side of his neck and across his jaw, threading through the pale claw marks like ink poured into cracked glass. It wasn't a static stain. It moved, a slow, sick pulsing, veins spreading and receding in time with his heartbeat. Where it touched his skin, the flesh looked wrong. Too tight, too thin, like something beneath was trying to push its way out. I stared, throat dry. This is why no healer can mend it, he said. Why no maid has survived. It eats bonds, heiress. It eats wolves. The corruption pulsed again, and his jaw tightened in obvious pain. Without thinking, I lifted my hand. Don't, he snapped, but my fingers were already there, brushing the edge where normal skin met the crawling black. Pain exploded through me. Not my own. His. It speared from my fingertips up my arm, into my chest, everywhere at once, a searing, ripping agony, as if hot hooks had been sunk into my bones and were being dragged in opposite directions. My knees buckled. The hallway vanished, replaced by a rush of images that were not mine. A stone chamber lit by sickly green light. A circle etched into the floor, wet with blood. Voices chanting in a language my mind refused to hold. A figure standing at the center of it all, Cale years younger, bound to an iron pillar, eyes wild as black lines crawled under his skin. Another figure across from him. Hooded. Raising a knife that shimmered like moonlight turned wrong. The vision shattered. I hit the floor hard. My palms skidded on cold stone. The echo of the pain still rang in my bones, dull now but real. Cale was crouched in front of me, hand clamped around my wrist, breathing ragged. His eyes were wide, the ice in them fractured with shock. I told you not to touch it, he ground out. That's your idea of a warning? I managed, voice shaking. What did you feel? He shook my wrist once, not gently. Tell me, heiress. All of it, I whispered. The pain. The chamber. I swallowed. The spell. Silence dropped between us, heavy as the mountain. No one survives contact with the curse, he said finally, more to himself than to me. No one. Well, I said weakly, no one else is already halfway broken. His gaze snapped to mine. I regretted the words instantly. But something had loosened inside me in that flash of shared agony, the sense that the space between us wasn't as vast as I'd thought. He released my wrist slowly, as if worried I might crumple. I used the wall to push myself back to my feet. My legs wobbled. Come, he said. If you fall, I will not carry you up 3 flights of stairs. A lie. He'd do it and pretend he hated every second. This time, when we reached my chamber door, he didn't reach for the bolt immediately. He stood just inside the threshold, watching me as if seeing me for the first time. What happened to your wolf? He asked. The question landed like a stone in my stomach. I wrapped my arms around myself. She never came. Impossible. We waited through my first shift, I said. And the second. And the third. Blood moons, solstices, all of it. Nothing. The shaman said the moon had rejected me. I tried to keep my voice light and failed. You can imagine how thrilled my parents were. His brows drew together. Rejection leaves a scar. An emptiness, yes, but a clean one. Yours is, not that. I let out a bitter laugh. Forgive me, Alpha, I didn't realize my failure was such a fascinating puzzle. He stepped closer. Not close enough to trap me this time, but enough that his presence pressed against my senses. Listen, he said quietly. The magic in that hall tonight, the way the bonds snapped into place, the way you touched the curse and lived, that is not chance. The spell that crippled me did not only seek my blood. It was cast wide. Deep. His gaze dropped briefly to my chest, to the place behind my ribs that had ached most when I touched his curse. What if your wolf was not denied you, he said, but taken? Severed. Hidden. As mine was wounded. Two halves of the same working. The idea stole my breath. I'd lived so long with the certainty that I was simply wrong, a mistake of nature. To hear another explanation felt dangerous. Why? I whispered. Why would anyone do that? To weaken two lines that might one day unite, he said. To make certain no heir of mine ever rose with power enough to break the spell that binds us. I stared at him, heart pounding so hard it hurt. I shook my head. You're saying we're cursed together. I am saying, he replied, that whoever tried to destroy us failed to account for one thing. He held out his hand. I hesitated only a moment before placing mine in it. Warmth flared where our skin met. Not the burning agony of the curse, but a deep, humming heat that spread through my fingers, up my arm, into that hollow place in my chest. Something there stirred, turning over in sleep, pressing faintly against its unseen cage. I gasped. Kale's eyes widened just a fraction. You feel it? Yes, I breathed. What is that? Your wolf, he said, voice rough. Reaching. For the first time since I'd stood in the back of the lunar circle with mud on my shoes and shame in my throat, I did not feel like a failure. I felt wronged. Stolen from. And God's help me, I believed him. He let my hand go reluctantly, as if breaking a circuit. Whoever cast that spell will not tolerate being thwarted, he said. Until I know more, you are not to leave this room without escort. My brief flare of hope dimmed. So we're back to the cage. His mouth flattened. He turned toward the door. Wait, I said. Don't lock it. Please. Silence swelled between us. He stood with his hand on the bolt, fingers flexing. The struggle was visible in the set of his shoulders, in the way his jaw worked. At last, he stepped back. The latch stays, he said. Do not make me regret it. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, but no metal slid into place. I stood there for a long time, staring at the unbolted wood, listening to the echo of my own heartbeat and the faint, fragile flutter of something else beneath it. The door stayed unlocked. It took me until the next afternoon to test it. Daria had left a tray on the small table and disappeared. The keep was quiet, muffled by fresh snow. My restlessness had teeth. I put my hand on the handle. It turned. The corridor outside was empty. Torches burned low, their flames steady. I stepped out, half expecting alarms to sound, guards to materialize from the walls. Nothing. I followed the faintest of sounds, a distant, rhythmic ringing, metal on metal. It drew me down the stairs, through a side passage, then another, the air growing warmer with each turn. The forge was a cavern carved into the belly of the keep, half open to the courtyard on one side. Heat blasted over me as soon as I stepped through the archway. Fire roared in the great stone hearths. Sparks flew like trapped stars. Kale stood bare-armed before an anvil, sweat shining on his skin. Scars mapped his chest and shoulders, pale lines against the tan. He brought a glowing strip of metal down onto the anvil with precise, punishing blows. Each strike rang through the chamber. His black wolf's presence pressed against my senses, thick and potent, though the beast itself wasn't visible. It felt like a shadow looming just behind him, mirroring each movement. A handful of warriors worked at nearby stations. One of them, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with a jagged scar along his jaw, noticed me first. His lip curled. "This is no place for omegas," he said, disgust curling around the word. "The southern girl is lost." Kale's hammer paused in mid-swing. The silence that followed was dangerous. "Yes," he said slowly, without looking up. "She is." The warrior snorted. "Then I'll have someone see her back too." Kale turned. The full force of his gaze hit the man like a blow. "Eris," he said, loud enough for the whole forge to hear, "is my Luna. She is welcome anywhere in this hold." "Is that unclear, Darren?" The warrior, Darren, then, went stiff. "No, Alpha," he said through clenched teeth, bowing his head. Kale's attention shifted to me. "If you are going to trespass," he said, "you might as well come closer." I stepped forward, cheeks burning. The heat in the forge made the air waver, warping the lines of his scars. The dark veins of the curse pulsed faintly along his neck, stark against the sweat-slick skin. "What is this place?" I asked. "The heart of Blightstone," he said. "Every king of the North forges his own blade here. It is tradition." He lifted the glowing metal with tongs, turning it so the light played along its length. "Steel is like a wolf," he went on. "Too brittle, and it shatters. Too soft, and it bends. Fire and hammering teach it what it is meant to be." "And what does that make you?" I asked before I could stop myself. "The hammer?" One corner of his mouth curved. "Often." His gaze tracked over me, lingering on my face, my hands, the way I stood like I might bolt at any moment. "You," he said, "are the fire." I blinked. "I told you, I'm not a weapon." No, his eyes held mine. "But you will forge one. Whether you wish to or not." There was no threat in his voice. Only certainty. The sense that he was not talking about swords at all. Before I could ask what he meant, a shout came from the courtyard. "Alpha!" A young warrior stumbled into the forge, snow clinging to his boots. He dropped to one knee. "Feral packs at the eastern border," he panted. "2, maybe 3. Testing the wards. We drove them back, but they will return in numbers." Kale's entire body sharpened, focus snapping away from me. "How many casualties?" he demanded. 3 wounded, none dead. For now," Kale muttered. He set the half-formed sword aside and reached for his tunic, shrugging it on with practiced speed. The curse lines vanished beneath dark leather. "Double the patrols," he told Darren. "We ride within the hour." And the Luna? Darren asked, unable to keep the skepticism from his tone. Cale's gaze flicked to me. I braced myself. He would lock me back in that tower, bolt the door, hide me from whatever enemy prowled the borders. You will remain in the keep, he said. Predictable. Infuriating. With half your warriors gone and the rest stretched thin? I shot back. That seems unwise, if you truly believe someone might be targeting your bloodline. A few of the Smiths shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke to the Alpha King that way. Not here. Cale's eyes cooled. You presume much. I presume the spell that nearly killed you may not be finished, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. And that the wolves at your border tonight might be more interested in the wolfless Luna who touched your curse and lived than in the stone of your walls. Silence dropped over the forge. Cale studied me, the lines around his mouth tightening. I could almost see the war inside him, instinct to protect by confining, colliding with the equally powerful knowledge that cages made targets of what they held. At last he swore under his breath, low and vicious. There is the High Pass Lodge, Darren said reluctantly. Fortified. Easier to guard than the hold, if the enemy seeks her specifically. I almost thanked him. Then I remembered the way he'd said Southern girl and thought better of it. Cale nodded once, decision snapping into place. Prepare the lodge, he ordered. Darren, you will take a hand-picked guard and escort the Luna there. She does not leave your sight. My heart jolted. You're sending me away. I am sending you somewhere safer, he corrected. For now. I don't even know the way back. Good, he said. Fewer chances for you to be foolish. He turned to me fully, stepping close enough that the forge heat and his own washed over me in a dizzying rush. You will ride with me to the pass, he said. After that, I go to the border. When the threat is contained, I will come for you. The certainty in his tone made something twist in my chest. What if you don't? I asked, voice almost lost under the roar of the fire. His hand brushed a stray strand of hair back from my face, calloused fingers lingering a heartbeat too long. I will, he said simply. Snow knifed at my cheeks as we rode out of the courtyard. Cale's warhorse was enormous, a black beast with frost in its mane and eyes like polished coal. I sat in front of him, my back pressed to his chest, his arms braced on either side to hold the reins. Every movement of the horse rolled us together, the hard planes of his body a solid wall of heat against my spine. The wind stole my breath. Cale's cloak wrapped around us both, smelling of leather and smoke and winter. Darren and a knot of elite warriors rode ahead and behind, a moving shield. Over the rise to our left, a shadow paced us, huge, dark, four-legged. The storm wolf, eyes blazing blue in the swirling white, sometimes visible, sometimes nothing but a presence at the edge of sight. Blightstone shrank behind us, swallowed by snow and distance. I didn't know what waited at the lodge, or at the border, or in the dark working that had once torn through both our lives. But as the blizzard swallowed the world and the king's arms tightened instinctively around me to keep me steady in the saddle, one truth rooted itself in my bones. Whatever curse had been meant to destroy us had failed in one crucial way. It had underestimated how dangerous we might become together. I learned that in the mountains. The High Pass Lodge clung to the spine of the world like a stubborn knot of stone and timber. Wind sobbed around its eaves, dragging claws of snow across the windows. Inside, the air tasted of smoke and iron, fur and sweat, a smaller echo of Blightstone, but without the suffocating weight of 1,000 eyes. We're 3 days from the hold, Darren told me that first morning, when Cale had already ridden back into the storm. Closer to the border than to safety. Stay inside the wards, Luna, and you might live long enough for the Alpha to return. Might. Comforting. He obeyed Cale's command to guard me, but his gaze held the same calculation I'd seen in the forge, respect for his king warring with suspicion of the southern nobody who had landed in their midst. Life at the lodge fell into a brittle rhythm. The warriors drilled in the courtyard, their shouts carried thin on the freezing air. I watched from the walkway above, cloak pulled tight, fingers numb against the stone. When I offered to help with chores, Darren's mouth flattened. "Your work is staying alive," he said. "Let us handle the rest." At night, the mountains howled. The wind drove snow like shattered glass against the shutters. The old timbers creaked. I lay awake beneath heavy furs, staring at the dark rafters, and felt him. The sense of Cale was different now, no longer just an awareness in the stone, but a faint, taut thread tugging somewhere behind my ribs. Sometimes it jerked sharply, like pain half a world away. Sometimes it pulsed slow and steady, a heartbeat answering mine. My not-wolf pressed against that bond from the inside, restless and aching. She had no voice, no form, but I could feel her pacing. When Cale rode into battle, the emptiness inside me sharpened into a raw hunger, desperate and furious. "You're not supposed to exist," I wanted to tell her. "But you do. And he's out there bleeding with only half of what he was meant to have." The thought left me shaking. The attack came on a night when the sky was clear and the cold so deep it burned. I was sitting by the hearth in the main hall, pretending to read by firelight but really staring into the flames, counting the hours since I'd last felt Cale's presence tug along the bond. The warriors were scattered, 2 on the walls, 2 at the gate, a handful dicing at a corner table. The first warning was a shout snapped off mid-word. Darren was on his feet before the echo died, hand on the axe at his back. What was? The answer came as a chorus of howls, feral, ragged, wrong. Not the disciplined calls of northern packs, but the fractured chorus of something half-mad. The door slammed open. One of the sentries stumbled in, bleeding from a gash across his chest. "Feral wolves," he gasped. "And shifters with them. Too many. They're aiming for..." His gaze cut to me. My stomach dropped. Darren shoved him toward the inner rooms. "Barricade the back. Sound the horn. Go." He turned to me, expression iron. "Basement. Now." "I can fight," I said, even though we both knew it wasn't true. "You don't have a wolf." I lifted my chin. "I have 2 hands and a decent sense of self-preservation." The hall shook as something massive slammed against the outer doors. Men shouted on the walls. The horn finally blared, thin and reedy over the chaos. Darren's jaw tightened. "You were right. They're here for you. All the more reason for you to hide." He thrust me toward the back of the hall. I stumbled, then caught myself. "Don't die," I whispered. He gave a humorless snort. "I'll add it to my list of duties, Luna." The hidden stair to the cellar yawned black and narrow. I made it 3 steps down before stopping. The wolves were wrong. I could feel them now the way I'd felt the curse on Cale, a crawling presence at the edges of the wards, testing for weakness. Their hunger wasn't for flesh. It was for something else. For me. Running wouldn't change that. I turned and sprinted back up the stairs. The front of the lodge was chaos. The great doors had held, but only barely, they shuddered with each impact, wood splintering, hinges screaming. Warriors braced them with their shoulders, teeth bared, sweat freezing on their brows. Darren stood in the center of the hall, barking orders, directing archers to the arrow slits, sending others to reinforce the gate. "Eris, damn it," he snapped when he saw me. "I told you to stay below." "They'll tear this place apart until they find me," I said. "The cellar won't stop them." A crash interrupted me. One of the shutters on the upper level burst inward in a spray of wood and snow. A feral wolf launched through the gap, eyes wild, foam flying from its jaws. Another followed, then a third, gaunt, crazed, their fur matted with ice and blood. The wards were failing. "Form up!" Darren roared. Warriors shifted mid-stride, bodies cracking and reshaping, fur rippling over skin. Wolves met ferals in a snarl of fangs and claws. The air filled with the iron stench of blood. For a moment, the line held. Then I saw it. The pattern. The ferals threw themselves at our defenders not to break through them in force, but to pull them away. A pair of rogues, half-shifted with two long arms and twisted faces, slipped around the edge of the melee and darted along the wall, eyes fixed on me. Darren saw it too. "Get her out," he shouted, cutting his way toward me. Too late. One feral slammed into the side door, splintering it off its hinges. Snow knifed in. The creature shook itself, red eyes locking onto me like hooks. Everyone else faded. The battle noise became a distant roar underwater. The feral charged. Time fractured. I saw myself as I'd been, a girl in a plain gray dress at the back of the lunar circle. Celine radiant at the altar. The pack's disdain, hard and familiar. Kale's blue eyes finding me in the crowd. The way his scars had glowed with sick light when I touched the curse. The agony that had ripped through us both. A life built on the belief that I was wrong. Broken. An absence in wolf shape. Something inside me, stretched too thin for too long, snapped. No. The word wasn't a sound. It was a crack through the marrow of the world. Heat and cold roared up from the hollow behind my ribs, braided together into something wild and terrible. The air thickened, every snowflake hanging suspended. Sparks from the hearth froze mid-leap. The feral leaped. I threw up my hands. Light exploded out of me. Blue-white, pure and blinding, it burst from my chest in a shockwave that shattered the air. Frost raced outward in jagged lines, crawling up beams, across the floor, over the walls. The hearthfire shrieked and flared azure, casting ghost light over gaping faces. The feral hit an invisible wall of storm and was flung backward as if struck by a giant's hand. It smashed into the far stones with a crack like breaking bone and slid to the floor, neck bent at an impossible angle, steam rising from its fur. Silence crashed down. I stood in the center of it, panting, hands shaking. The light didn't leave me. It clung to my skin in fragile threads, drifting like snowflakes that refused to fall. Something moved at my back. Not in the room. In the air. I turned. A wolf stood behind me. Not Kale's, though there was something of him in the line of its shoulders, the set of its jaw. This wolf was taller even than his beast, massive and shadow dark, its fur a black so deep it shimmered with veins of stormlight. Lightning flickered harmlessly along its ruff and tail. Its eyes were not blue, but molten gold, bright and steady. The sight of it hit me harder than the magic. You, I thought, throat closing. There you are. My wolf stepped forward, spectral paws leaving frost prints on the stone. She pressed her great head against my shoulder. The contact was more feeling than touch, a rush of belonging so fierce it doubled me over. We had been bound together all along, separated by an old, cruel spell. Now, at last, the chain had snapped. Around us, the warriors dropped to their knees. Stormborn, someone whispered. Darren stared, blood dripping from a cut across his cheek, axe hanging forgotten in his hand. His gaze dropped, and he bent his head. Luna, he said hoarsely. Stormborn Luna. The title rippled through the hall, a stunned, reverent echo. The rest of the ferals broke. Some died by northern teeth and steel. Others fled into the night, howls dwindling into the distance, chased by the wrath of a storm that was finally awake. When it was over, I sagged to my knees. The light around me dimmed, settling like frost into my bones. My wolf lifted her head toward the mountains, eyes blazing, then faded from sight, still there, just beneath my skin, no longer a hollow but a presence. I couldn't stop shaking. Not from cold. From knowing that whoever had tried to erase me had failed. Kale reached us before dawn. I felt him coming before the horns sounded, an urgent pull along the bond, a flare of pain and rage and something like disbelief. By the time his warband thundered into the courtyard, the lodge still hummed with leftover magic. Frost clung to every beam, every stone, feathered in patterns that looked almost like runes. The dead ferals lay in a neat line outside, eyes glazed, steaming in the brittle air. I stood on the threshold, Darren and the surviving warriors flanking me. My wolf paced just beneath my skin, watching through my eyes. Kale swung down from his horse, cloak snapping in the wind. Snow dusted his hair and shoulders. His gaze swept the scene once, taking in the carnage, the frost, the crackled blue scorch marks on the hearth visible through the open door. Then his eyes found me. He stopped. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The warband hung back, restless, sensing something they didn't understand. I must have looked different. I felt different. The magic hadn't left, it coiled low and steady inside me, a quiet storm waiting for my call. My breath fogged the air in small bursts of pale blue. Kale approached slowly, as if afraid I might vanish. Eris, he said, voice rough. I think your spell found its missing half, I managed. A breath that was almost a laugh escaped him. Then he did something that shocked his warriors more than the frozen lodge. He went to one knee before me. Not in fealty. In relief. His head bowed, shoulders carved with tension, as if they'd been holding up the sky for years and had finally found somewhere else to rest. I felt you, he said, the words for me alone. The storm. I thought, he cut himself off, jaw working. Are you hurt? Exhausted, I admitted. But, whole. For the first time. His hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped my cheek. The contact sent a shiver through us both. My wolf pressed forward, sending her other half through my skin. Stormborn Luna, Darren said quietly behind us. Kale's head tilted, eyes flicking to his beta. Something like pride flared in that glacial blue. Get the dead burned and the wounded tended, he said, rising. We ride for Blightstone as soon as the horses can stand it. He didn't let go of my hand. The seer met us in a chamber deep beneath the keep, where the stone sweated old secrets. She was older than the mountain, or looked it, skin like wrinkled parchment, hair white as new snow. Her blind eyes were milk-clouded, but they followed the movements of the curse with uncanny precision as it crawled along Cale's neck. "You should have died," she said to him without preamble. "And you?" Her pale stare cut to me, unnerving in its intensity. "You should never have had a wolf at all." "Encouraging," I muttered. She ignored me, turning to the wall where runes had been carved into the rock generations ago. Her gnarled fingers traced the lines, lips moving soundlessly. "2 threads," she murmured at last. "One to rot the king's line from within. One to cut the storm line from the world." Her touch skimmed across intersecting symbols. Cast together, but never meant to meet again. "Storm line?" I asked. She tapped my chest with one bony finger. "Yours. Buried deep, bound and hidden. The same hand that clawed at his wolf took yours and wrapped it in ice. Any mate he took would feed the curse. Any power you gained would shatter it. So the spell split you apart and hoped distance and time would finish the work. Until the moon decided otherwise," Cale said softly. The seer smiled, a thin, cracked thing. "The moon loves her loopholes." She gestured me closer. "Lay your hand on the mark," she said. "If I am wrong, it will kill you. If I am right, it will hurt." "Wonderful," I said. "I've always wanted my choices to be that clear." Cale caught my wrist. "We don't have to do this now." "Yes," I said, heart pounding. "We do." I lifted my hand and placed it against the side of his neck, over the place where the curse pulsed darkest. This time, I didn't flinch from the pain. It hit, sharp, cold, biting, but instead of ripping through me uncontrolled, it flowed into something waiting. My wolf surged up, jaws bared, not at Cale but at the corruption writhing under my palm. I let the storm go. Blue-white light poured from my skin into his, not in a violent rush like at the lodge, but in a steady, icy cascade. Frost bloomed beneath my hand, spider-webbing along the lines of the curse. The black veins recoiled, shrinking away from the cold, their frantic pulsing slowing. Cale hissed, muscles locking. His fingers dug into my shoulders. "Breathe," I said through my own clenched teeth. "I've got you." The seer's voice was a distant chant, words old enough to have edges. The runes on the wall flickered faintly in answer. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the darkness receded. By the time I pulled my hand away, the crawling black had retreated from his jaw entirely, leaving only pale scar tissue and faint, silver-white lines that glowed softly in the dim light. Again, the seer said. "In days. In weeks. As long as it takes. Together, you can starve it." Cale touched his neck, fingers trembling. "We were meant to fail alone," he said quietly, eyes on mine. "You, wolfless and ashamed. Me, cursed and empty. We were never supposed to stand in the same circle." "Too bad for whoever planned it," I replied, breathless. "They didn't account for my terrible life choices." He laughed then, truly laughed, for the first time since I'd met him, the sound stunned and unbelieving. Hope looked good on him. The years that followed did not smooth out like some gentle tale. They were hard, and sharp, and beautiful. I learned to call the storm without tearing the roof off the great hall. At first, the magic came only in bursts, wild, uncontained, but Cale stood with me on the training fields in snow and in rain, letting my power crash harmlessly against the shield of his wolf. Darren drilled me with blades and with tactics, treating me less like glass and more like a soldier. My wolf, our wolf, grew steadier. Sometimes she manifested fully, a great spectral shape racing alongside Kale's physical black beast on the frozen plains. Other times she was only a flicker in the corner of my eye, a whisper of warning before danger struck. The curse fought back. It crept along Kale's scars in the night, flaring when he overtaxed himself. Each time, I laid my hand on his skin and poured cold light into him until the darkness shrank. The seer's runes recorded our progress, a slow, stubborn victory etched in fading lines. The pack watched. They saw me stand on the walls in blizzards and hold a barrier of crackling frost against feral assaults. They brought their wounded to me, and I used the gentler side of the storm to knit bone and numb pain. The first time a hardened warrior bowed and called me Stormborn Luna without a trace of mockery, I nearly cried. Darren's respect shifted, grudgingly at first, then fiercely. He stood at my back in council, argued with me about strategies, and once, when a delegation from the south insulted me to my face, he broke a man's nose in the middle of the hall. Celine's letter came in the second year. The parchment smelled faintly of honeysuckle and home. She wrote of a mate found in another valley, of a bond that had surprised her as much as mine had shocked us all. There was pain in her words, and lingering hurt, but also a strange kind of peace. We were never meant to share the same crown, she wrote. I see that now. Be careful with the one you've been given, little fracture. I wrote back, for the first time, as someone who no longer felt like a crack in our bloodline but a different pattern entirely. Through it all, Kale and I changed. We argued, gods, we argued, but the battles became less about fear and more about strategy. We learned where the other would yield and where they would not. He stopped saying my Luna like a claim and started saying my mate like a promise. Some nights he woke sweating, the ghost of the curse burning under his skin. On those nights I pressed my hand to his neck and whispered until the darkness receded. Other nights I woke gasping from dreams of a blood-red moon and a girl in gray who still thought she was nothing, and he held me until the shame faded. Our bond, once jagged and forced, settled into something strong and startlingly gentle. By the second winter solstice, the curse was a shadow of what it had been. By the third, it was quiet. On the longest night of the year, under a full moon so bright it turned the mountains to silver, Kale and I stood on the battlements of Blightstone. Snow lay thick on the stones, pressed into ridges by patrol boots. The air was knife-sharp, but the cold no longer bit the way it once had. Not with the storm coiled warm inside my bones. Below, in the courtyard, two figures moved through the snow. Kale's wolf, solid, massive, black as midnight, paced with measured power, breath steaming. At his side ran my storm wolf, spectral and blazing, paws leaving glowing prints that faded slowly as they passed. Their movements matched without effort, two shadows of the same force. They look good together, I said softly. So do we, Kale replied. I glanced up at him. The scars on his face caught the moonlight, pale and clean. The curse was gone, but when I reached up and brushed my fingers along the familiar lines, a faint silver glow followed my touch, like frost tracing glass. Still there, I murmured. Reminders, he said. Not chains. His hand covered mine, anchoring it to his cheek. He turned into the touch, eyes closing briefly. I used to think hope was the cruelest thing the moon could give me, he said quietly. I could endure pain. I could endure war. But hope? That was dangerous. Every time I tried to reach for a future, the curse took it away. He opened his eyes, looking down at me with that steady, glacial blue that no longer felt cold. And then you stood in that circle, a girl who thought she had nothing to offer, and hope terrified me more than any enemy ever had. You hid it well, I said, trying for lightness and failing. My throat was too tight. He huffed a laugh. Barely. I looked back out over the snow. The wind toyed with the edge of my white furred cloak, carrying the distant sounds of laughter from the hall below. The north no longer felt like a foreign land filled with enemies. It felt like ours. I spent most of my life thinking I was born wrong, I admitted. That the moon had rejected me. The pack never let me forget it. I thought, if I could just stay small enough, quiet enough, maybe I wouldn't break anything else. Kale's arm slipped around my waist, drawing me closer. Eris. I looked up. You were never meant to stand behind your sister, he said, voice low and sure, every word a vow. You were meant to stand beside me. The truth of it settled around my shoulders like another cloak, heavy, warm, exactly my size. For the record, I said, I would have been terrible at standing behind anyone. I know, he replied, and kissed me. The bond flared, not with the desperate heat of new magic, but with the deep, steady burn of something earned. The storm inside me answered the echo of what remained of his curse, filling every old hollow with light. When we broke apart, the moon had climbed higher, painting the world in silver and ice. Below, the two wolves raced along the walls, black fur and stormlight, side by side, leaving trails of disturbed snow and faint, fading glow. Blightstone's windows burned warm against the night, each one a small sun in the dark. Laughter and music spilled out, carried on the wind. The north, once a place of fear and whispered curses, now lay spread beneath us like a kingdom waking from a long, hard winter. I laced my fingers with Kale's and leaned into his side, stormborn Luna of the north, no longer wolfless, no longer forgotten, no longer ashamed. Once, the world had tried to erase us. Now it would have to live with what we had become. If this story caught your attention, subscribe and join us for the next story.